Hello class, I hope you're all doing well. Welcome to your Unit 5 lecture. Today we're going to talk about plot, and we're going to talk about some of the primary elements of plot and also some of the different types of plot. This semester we've studied and structured our play viewing on a study of Aristotle's 6 elements. We've talked about them time and time again: character, language, spectacle, rhythm, plot, and theme. We've looked really closely at theme, character, and language, and for this unit we're going to concentrate on plot. So what is plot? For many of us, plot's the first place we go when reflecting on any type of narrative, whether it's a play, a film, or a novel. When we ask the question, so what was it about, we're almost always answering with plot. In the Poetics, Aristotle calls plot the soul of tragedy. For him, it was extremely important and perhaps the most important element. It holds the story together, contains the incidences of the play, produces the tragic effects for Aristotle, and includes some of the most tragic elements, including reversals and discoveries. For us, plot's very simple: the arrangement of the events or the selection and order of scenes in a play. So when we're telling a story, when we're talking about plot is the scenes that we choose to include in our storytelling, in our play, and the order of the scenes that we choose to include. A story is much larger than plot. Plot is a very specific ordering of things, or an arrangement is another way to think about it. Plot's very often equated with story, but there is a big difference, as I was talking about it, and we've talked about before. A story is a full account of an event or series of events, and generally in chronological order. A plot is the selection or arrangement of actions or scenes. A good way to remember the difference is that the story is what happens, and the plot is how it happens. Here's a little example from talking about film, where all the events that are directly presented to us, including their causal relationships, the order, the duration, frequency, and spatial locations. The plot refers to the arrangement of the material, and the story refers to the sum or total events of the narrative. You can think about story in a way of that would also include everything that the viewer includes in their imagination and imaginative reconstruction of all the events that they've been told. So there's an infinite number of plots, different types of plots, different parts of plots we could talk about. Um, you could take a grad school classes for years and years and years, really studying all the differences and intricacies and all the difference and pieces and parts of plots. Um, but there are a few elements, and today we're going to talk about 4 of them that not all, but almost all plots can contain. Those 4 things are the exposition, the conflict, the crisis, and the resolution. You can see those talked about in 2 different ways here. One is problems, actions, changes, and resolutions, and the other is just kind of a traditional plot diagram that you've probably seen 1,000 times, where you have the exposition, which usually follows an inciting incident. You have rising action, a series of complications that lead to a climax, um, which ends up in a resolution. So the first thing we're going to talk about is exposition. Uh, and I've chosen this picture from one of my favorite movies, Robin Hood, the Disney version, where we have Jackadale, the rooster here, who narrates all the information and gives us, in a little song, um, all the exposition that we need to know about Robin Hood, about Sherwood Forest before the action of the story begins. Exposition, roughly, you can just think about as the stuff that you need to know as an audience member, such as what is the setting and who are the characters. The exposition usually references the antecedent action, meaning everything that happened before the start of a play. We can also talk about the point of attack when we talk about the exposition. The point of attack is very simply where the play starts. Does it start very early in the story? Does it start late in the story? Most modern stories, the point of attack tend to happen pretty late in the story, so you get all those given circumstances that come beforehand. Um, for the Greeks, they would always talk about a good point of attack starting in medias res, or in the middle of things. Um, You can think, if you want to think about how expository information is revealed, you can think back to some of your favorite plays or movies, or maybe the first episode of a TV show that you really like, and think about how the writer gave us all the information we needed to know in the story. How did he introduce us? He or she introduced us to the characters, to the scene, to the setting. All that stuff all falls under exposition. Next, we're going to talk about conflict. Conflict is based in character motivation. A character wants something, but there are forces working against them. We've talked about different types of conflicts in the past. It can be internal or external, meaning it can take place within the character's mind or between a character and exterior forces. Conflict is most visible between two or more characters, usually a protagonist and an antagonist, but can take a lot of different forms. Many different types of conflict. We could talk about man versus self, man versus man, versus natural forces, versus groups or supernatural forces. In many plays, the conflict is going to start off with what we call the inciting incident. It's the event in the play that begins the conflict or kicks off things. Here is an image from Star Wars in which Luke Skywalker sees the video of Princess Leia, played by R2-D2, and she hears a princess coming and asking this farm boy for help. That's really the incident that starts. So it's not the first thing that we see. It's not the first incident, but it's the one that really kicks off the story. And at this point, Luke Skywalker's got to decide if he wants to go try to save the princess or not. So following that, we have the rising action, or the slow build of different conflicts. So now that he wants to save the princess, he has to figure out how he's going to get there. How does he get a crew to get a ship to getting there? And then once he gets there, how does he break her out of the jail? How do they escape? Those are all conflicts that are building on one atop of the other. All started off by this initial conflict, which is the inciting incident. As I talked about when we're talking about conflict and the steps of rising action and complications, I put a picture here of Groundhog Day as an example, right? Where Bill Murray's character keeps reliving the same day over and over and over, but each day he has a new set of challenges or a new set of conflicts or complications to work through, all part of the rising action, all leading to where we're heading next, which is to the climax. The climax is a story is the point at which one or the other forces is favored, the point at which events must turn in one direction or the other. The climax is the major turning point in a play. It's usually preceded by what's known as the crisis. It's the moment that the outcome of the conflict is determined. I want to use this picture of Pinocchio here because I wanted to explain a little bit of the difference between crisis versus climax. Here in this explanation of the structure of drama, it says that in the tradition of a well-made play, a drama includes a series of crises that lead to the final crisis known as the climax. The climax is often defined as the high point in the action, or the final or most significant crisis in the action. And that's when sometimes a character will win or lose. No, that's not always clear-cut. So I put this image of Pinocchio turning into the donkey because for me in the Pinocchio story, at least in this version, this is the crisis of the play. Pinocchio goes off. He goes off on this ship with these crazy boys. He plays pool, he smokes cigars, and he starts to turn into a donkey. At this point, everything is kind of lost. Geppetto's been swallowed by the whale, and everything at this moment, Pinocchio turning to the donkey, everything is lost. He's final crisis. He can't get any worse. The climax, however, is when Pinocchio goes and saves his father, or saves Geppetto from the belly of the whale. To me, that's the climax. So the crisis usually is the moment when everything is lost. You can't get any worse. It's the worst possible outcome. And the climax is the moment when we learn whether the characters either overcome that and we have a happy ending, or they don't overcome it and they succumb to the problems of the crisis and we have a tragic ending. Shakespeare is very, very clear in those distinctions, as you'll see in this next slide. So I put these two when we're talking about resolution or denouement. In simplest term, everything that comes after the climax, it may be satisfactory or unsatisfactory, comic or tragic, right? So here in Shakespeare, we have in Shakespeare and his tragedies, they all end the same way. Hamlet, Macbeth, Lear, everybody dies. That's how you tell a Shakespeare tragedy. All of Shakespeare comedies, they all end the same way, and that's with a wedding. If you want to know if one of Shakespeare's plays is a comedy or tragedy, just turn to the last play and see if everybody's getting married or seeing if everybody's died. Yeah, very simple. You guys know what resolution and denouement is. It's everything that happens at the end of the after the conflict. I'm sorry, after the climax. Everything comes together, and in some stories we have a nice little bow. Here from Princess, what is this? From the Little Mermaid, with them getting married and living happily ever after. And sometimes we have something like Hamlet or Macbeth that ends very messily, very nasty. So those are some of the elements of plots. Exposition, conflict, climax, and resolution. And like I said, there's hundreds and hundreds of different elements, small pieces and parts of plots that we could talk about. Reversals, turns, twists, things of that nature, discoveries. Though these four that I've just talked about really kind of exist in all stories, no matter what the type of plot that we're talking about. So now we're going to talk about some very common types of plots. I've organized them into kind of three distinct types. The first is what we call the climactic type. Here I have an example of the August Wilson play, Fences. Climactic plots are generally more what you're going to see if you go to see modern plays that have been written in the last 30 years. They generally have a smaller cast, a late point of attack. The time of the play is usually compressed into a very small time period, maybe 2 or 3 days, sometimes 2 or 3 hours. They tend to be broken into kind of long sections, so maybe a long first act and a long second act, or maybe a whole play that's 7 scenes perhaps. We're not going to see a play with a climactic type of plot that's going to have 30 scenes, for example. Usually location is usually restricted to one room or one place, and like I said, usually small number of characters, a very kind of a causal structure, traditional linear structure, where one event happens after the another. Very few subplots. Compression is a good word to think of when we think about a climactic plot structure. They're compressed, they're all put together. Another example of different types of kind of plot category would be an episodic type of plots. All of Shakespeare's plays would fall into this category. Here I've put a picture from Les Mis. It's episodic, it's epic. Usually an early point of attack, because we're going to get told all the information of the story. Usually they take place over a longer period of time. King Lear, the Caucasian Chalk Circle, Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, and generally an episodic piece, just like Les Mis here. We have lots of many short fragmented scenes, often trying to grasp the different facets of mankind, see different people in different types. So often have many different characters, can range over entire cities or countries. Dozens of characters. You can see in Les Mis dozens of them on stage right here. We have many threads of actions, parallel plots, comic subplots, counterplots juxtaposed. Not always is the action causal. Often there's a very complicated kind of web of causes for things. Way to think of episodic plots is taking a story and really expanding it. So in climactic types of plots, compression, episodic plots, big, expansive, over a long period of time with lots of people and lots of scenes. A third type of plot that we can talk about is what I like to call a non sequitur plot. This is kind of a basket maybe to throw some of uh, films or movies or plays into a box that maybe they don't fit into the climactic or episodic kind of types. Um, I would say the plays of Samuel Beckett or Eugene Ionesco, Theater of the Absurd plays certainly could fit into this type. Very different as the way they think time might not even exist in these plays. They very often are kind of language based, um, have little or no background information, usually not a lot of exposition. Um, Causation's usually not important, so it doesn't really matter in these types of plays whether one thing happens after the other. It's more about creating a feeling often or expressing a theme. Chaos is the word that I like to use to describe non sequitur types of plots. So climactic, compression, episodic, expansion, non sequitur, chaotic. So those are three very broad, very general kind of plots. There are also, when we can talk about plots, we could talk about um, plot types that have been used throughout the centuries to tell different types of stories. And so I'm going to introduce you to two of those right now. Again, there's hundreds upon hundreds of kind of basic or I don't want to use the word generic, but traditional or plot structures that have been used many times. So the first one I want to introduce you to is the hero's journey. So the hero's journey, or the idea of it, was developed by this man on the right, Joseph Campbell, who was a comparative mythologist, worked in the 60s and 70s primarily, early 80s. His book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, really changed the way that we see and think about plots. Um, so Joseph Campbell, what he did was he went back and looked at stories and myths from hundreds and for the centuries. He looked at Greeks and Native American myths and Persian myths, myths from all over the world. And he asked the question, what do all of these myths have in common? And reading through all these stories, through all these different cultures, Joseph Campbell realized that a lot of them structurally contained the same elements. And he took all those and came up with what he called as the monomyth or the monoplot structure, which also he called, or it came to be known as, the hero's journey. Perhaps the most famous example of the hero's journey would be Star Wars. George Lucas used Joseph Campbell's work in the creation of his of Star Wars, and so it's a very it's an example that we can use to describe the hero's journey because most of us know Star Wars. So some of the different events you can see that are here in this kind of circle of the hero's journey. We would start at the beginning where the hero, the character in this case, Luke Skywalker, is in an ordinary world. He's an ordinary farm boy, just kind of doing his ordinary stuff. The second thing is a call to an adventure. I showed the picture earlier of him discovering R2-D2 and the image of Princess Leia. So we have this farm boy who gets called on this adventure to come to save this princess. Initially, he refuses the call, right? Because he doesn't want to deal with it. He's got too many things other to do with. And eventually, usually something tragic happens, which kind of forces his hand and makes him go on this journey. In the case of Star Wars, his Luke Skywalker's uncle and aunt are killed. So now he really has no choice but to go try to save this princess. He meets with a mentor. In Luke's case, it would be Obi-Wan Kenobi. And then they cross the first threshold. For them, the first threshold would be they go in the bar where they meet all these kind of unsavory characters. That's where they meet Hans and Chewie and escape on the Millennium Falcon. Then the next part is usually the big, kind of the largest plot part with test allies and enemies. Now the hero has crossed the first threshold and entered what's known as the special world of the play or of the story. In this area, he's going to be confronted with tests. If you remember Star Wars, and they're on the Millennium Falcon, and he does a lot of tests with the lightsabers. He's going to fight some battles, and he is going to confront. He's going to have some friends, his allies. He's got Chewie and Hans and some other people now, and he's also determined, the stormtroopers and who the bad guys are. So now he has allies and enemies. They approach the innermost cave, which at this point would be the Death Star. They go in. He rescues the princess, and they are caught in their escape. And that's where they have what's known as the ordeal. Very often, this is known as in the belly of the whale, which is a kind of from Pinocchio story. And then he has the reward, the seizing of the sword. So now he's got the princess, and they escape, right, from the Death Star. In the traditional hero story, there's the section is the road back. So now he's gotten the hero has gotten the princess or the elixir or the special magic or whatever he or she went off on this journey to do, and they come back to they return with their prize, and that prize usually changes them, but also the world that they've left. Also, when we talk about the hero's journey, here's 5, 6 different popular stories that are kind of all based on the hero's journey. The Harry Potter series, Star Wars, The Matrix, Lord of the Rings, and Finding Nemo. In addition to the plot structure that Joseph Campbell proposed in his work about the hero's journey, in those types of plots, we can also see different types of characters that are part of these journeys, part of these stories. The hero, the old wise man, the enemy, the kind of big bad guy, the threshold guardian, the shapeshifters, and the tricksters. Kind of cool stuff if you're into it. Thinking about different plots and thinking about how you can see a lot of stories that all use similar plots and just change some of the elements of them. Now I'm going to talk about the hero also journey. There's some videos that you can watch that I've posted on the hero's journey, and also so another type of story structure or a plot structure that you're going to see used over and over is the Beauty and the Beast structure. So here's 4 films that are quite popular: Edward Scissorhands, E.T., Beauty and the Beast, and The Iron Giant. All of these are just as the Matrix and Harry Potter are all based on Star Wars, are all based on the hero's journey. These are all based on what we call a Beauty and the Beast plot structure. Really traditionally based on the original Beauty and the Beast, where you have someone who discovers what quote unquote beast, Iron Giant, Edward Scissorhands, or E.T., something that's other, something that's different. The person that discovers them is generally the protagonist. They learn to like them, they become friends, but usually the outside world can't accept them, and generally these movies or story types ends up with the kind of the town chasing the beast out. The beast usually, but not always, dies, and at that point, the town, the society at large, sees the love that the protagonist had for the beast, and kind of the society then realized kind of how wrong they were to have ostracized this beast. Again, like I said, we could go on and on with different types of plots. The hero's journey and the Beauty and the Beast plot structure are 2 very common ones that I just wanted to introduce to you. So that's it for this lecture. Thank you so much. We're talking about plot. We talked about some of the elements of plot, the exposition, crisis, conflict, climax, inciting incidents, resolutions. And then we talked a little bit about some different types of plots, episodic plots, compressed kind of modern plots, and non sequitur plots, And then I'll talk to you about two different kind of plot structures that are very common: the hero's journey and the Beauty and the Beast plot structure. I hope you guys learned a little bit more about plots in this very short lecture. Plots is a very complicated um, subject that we could go on and on about. But I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed it. Have an awesome time, and I will see you at the theater.